Joining me today is Carli Judice, who fought on Dana White's Contender Series in one of the most epic fights of all time. Finds herself the newest member of the UFC's roster. So, Carli, I got to start here. We found out that you were a replacement for Shavkat Rakhmonov's sister on like a week's notice. We know that you had, virtually no time to prepare here. How long had you known that this was a possibility that you would be filling in for that Tuesday night fight?
Right. We didn't even expect, Contender Series or any shot at the UFC, at least till I had, one more fight, one more win on my, on my roster, because like I had 3 wins, and I kept hearing you need 4 wins at least, you just need more fights and experience. So I was like, okay, I'm cool with that, just fight. And when the time is right, it'll happen. And then I was at work on a Saturday morning. I got a call from my manager. And we were looking for something in November, so I thought like, oh, they must have heard some news on that fight coming in November. And he said, hey, they have a Dana White Contender Series fight coming up September 26th. And in my mind, that was like, oh, that's like a few weeks away. Like just hearing it right off the bat, I was like, oh, okay, well, we got that. And he was like, oh, yeah, that's 10 days. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, let me just call my coach real quick. But that sounds awesome. So, my coach called me and he was like, I think we do it. And he was like, only question is, how's your weight? And I said, it's farther than it usually is, but, you don't pass up opportunity like this. And whatever it takes to get to the weight, like whatever I need to do is what I'm going to do. So that's kind of what happened. We just accepted the fight and it didn't even seem real. I was freaking out for the rest of that day. It finally started to set in.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about the weight too, because obviously, you're very tall, you're very strong. So I have to imagine, dropping whatever kind of weight you had to during fight week was pretty strenuous. Was it as crazy as I imagine it was?
Oh yeah, it was crazy. I usually do like a 6 to 8 week cut, like most everybody. And it's very slow and then I land the plane, weight wise, usually when I'm fight week, but this was like cramming it in all 10 days. I was 140, I walk around about 143, the highest 145, but I was 142 that day when they called. So I was like, I've never done that before. And I do my cuts slowly because I like to make sure that I get down to the weight when I need to. But so that's why we were a little nervous at first. I was like, oh, well, let's just do it. And it ended up working out great. I think my body really I didn't give myself another option. So my body just jumped on board, like mentally and physically. I said, I'm going to make that weight. And my body just helped me. It was kind of crazy how it did it too.
Well, that's incredible. Now I'm going to ask you about how that felt in the fight too. But before I do, walking through fight week, a lot of people on Contender Series, they fly out to Vegas 3 weeks before, 4 weeks before, get their headshots done, shadow box for the camera. I'm assuming they all had to do that leading up to your fight, like the week of your fight. Did you have like extra media obligations and stuff the week of the fight?
Oh yeah, the next day I asked him, my manager, about when we were gonna leave, and he said probably that Saturday before the fight. But then the next day, I think it was a Monday, they called me and they wanted to do media on the Wednesday. So they were like, can you fly out tomorrow? So it went from like leaving from Saturday to just a huge switch. And, I had to call my coaches and asked if any of them out of my 3 coaches, if any of them could come with me, all week. So I called one of my coaches. He was able to, drop everything so much. So he dropped the call. He dropped everything. He came with me. So we went up there on the Tuesday. We got in like Tuesday night, and then we had to do media on Wednesday, and so all kind of medicals too. So I did my media and medicals up there.
And just out of curiosity, how insane is that for you? Because you've done fight weeks before, right? You had a bunch of amateur fights. You've had 3 professional fights at this point. But we're talking about stuff on the regional scene, like low key stuff on the regional scene. You go from doing that to doing like the highest level of stuff pretty much that you can. Was it overwhelming leading up to the fight?
When I thought about it as like, this is crazy, yeah, it started to get like a little overwhelming, but I tried to really think of it. I knew that I had to think of it as like, I'm meant to be here, and like I can handle this. Like nothing is too big for me to handle. So as long as I kept it in a box like this, because it is huge, but as long as I kept it in this little small box and thought of it as, one day, thought of it, kept myself in the moment as opposed to what it really was, I was able to like handle everything as professionally as I could. Because also, like I turned pro not that long ago, but also I consider myself a professional. So I have to, treat everything, no matter how big or how small, as professionally as I could. So that's how I tried to go into every little thing that I did this week. Just treat it like I'm a professional, because I am. So
I love that mentality. Now, you get into the cage, and this is obviously the most interesting part of all of this. You get in the cage, and not only does she bring, like a pretty intense pace here, but it's like not necessarily something we've seen out of her if you've watched film on her.
right.
She takes her time, she picks apart people from the outside, she kind of makes it a slow, maybe not such an exciting fight. And instead, she brings you one of the most intense paces we've seen, and you match it. What were you thinking in the moment when she started coming forward like that at a pace we've never seen out of her?
Oh yeah, I was very surprised, and I'm one of those fighters that I don't like to watch too much film on my opponent. Plus, I had 10 days to do it, so even if I did want to watch a bunch, I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of studying. I like to my coaches to watch and then kind of tell me what I need to work on. I watched my my opponent's film like once or twice, as opposed to other people watching it a lot. But yeah, I did notice that she didn't like really start off very strong, so she was coming at me like a bull. I had to kind of. I knew I had to match that. And going in on 10 days notice, she had an 8-week to prepare cardio wise. And I knew I'm always in the gym. So I knew I had it in me. I knew that I was going to have to dig deep to match her pace the whole fight. But I think that's what I think I did. I think I did good at, finding the energy for what I needed to match. I couldn't, let her walk all over me because, that's how it starts to get overwhelming. So I kind of tried to slow down her pace in a way by matching, giving her some of my power and giving her some of my speed. So I think that went pretty well.
Absolutely. It did go really well. Now, I'm curious too, because we were just talking about, the wildest weight cut you've ever had to deal with, a pace that you weren't necessarily ready for. And yet somehow you're right. You matched it seemingly without any issue. Was there ever a time in the fight where you felt like, this is a lot physically, or this is maybe more than I was ready for physically, or did you feel yourself slowing down?
I started to get towards getting up off the stool after the second round. My legs kind of felt a little shaky, and there's always that moment for me, even in a lot of my other fights and my amateur fights, in the first round your lungs start to burn and you're like, oh, that's kind of scary. Your lungs are burning in the first round, but once you get past that point and then you push past that, is you get your little second win. But standing up off the stool, the after the second round, I was kind of well, my legs are a little shaky. And but for some reason I just knew that my body was gonna this is the once in a lifetime opportunity. Every fighter's dream to be on the Dana White's Contender Series, and I just knew that if mentally I could get through it, my body would carry through. Because our bodies are machines. If we put our mind to something, it's gonna happen. So I just try not to think about the fact that I was a little tired and my legs were shaky, and I knew my body was gonna do what it needed to get me through the last 5 minutes of the fight.
And it did, obviously. And you're landing the clear bigger shots, right, as the fight ends. And it seems like that's pretty much what it's going to come down to in the judges' minds, right? Is it's going to come down to she had a little bit more volume. If you look at the pure stats, you were clearly landing the harder shots. When they go to the judges' scorecards and you're standing there having your hand held by the referee, what were you thinking? Were you thinking that you had done enough? Were you thinking it was, pretty much the coin flip it was? What was sort of your mentality at that moment?
Well, to be honest, in the fight, I think I'm a little more critical, I come from a criticizing point of view. So I felt like I got hit a lot. So going into the decision, I was nervous and I was willing to, I was already in my head thinking of what I could have done better before I even stepped out of the cage. I was going through those moments. So when I heard it was a split, I was nervous. When I heard it was a split, I was when they started to explain it, announce the split, started to get a little excited because I was okay, because going right before the decision, I felt like I was just getting hit way too much and I was criticizing myself a lot. But yeah, a win would have been awesome. I'm happy with the split that it was. Just going back and watching it and realizing I did have good shots, because when you're in there, I wasn't thinking about what I was landing. I was just thinking about what I was getting hit with. So it did feel good to go back and watch it and realize I actually, I was in there competing, you know.
So then you obviously have to deal with the adrenaline dump, the whole emotional task of going backstage, seeing your coaches, talking with your coaches about the fight, and the whole show goes on. Other exciting fights, big knockouts, things like that. And we have that moment where they send all the winners out, they go and sit in chairs. Where were you at that moment when all the winners are out there in the chairs, seemingly hearing about their fate?
Yeah, whenever they walk me out the cage, I went to see the doctor for, about 5 minutes. And then they put you on the loser bus. They don't call it the loser bus. I call it the sitting in that loser bus, it hurts so bad. Just you're thinking about everything that you did wrong and everything you could have did better and just everything you did wrong in your whole career up to that point, and it's like, what could have you done more of? But yeah, so we went back to the hotel, and then we turned on the fights a little later when everybody else were sitting in the chairs. I was sitting in the hotel, and that's when we watched, the contract announcements.
So obviously, so you got to watch it live, which by the way is awesome. I'm glad to hear that because I assume half the time people are getting text messages and in weird scenarios like that. So you get to watch it live. You're sitting in the hotel room with your coaches, I take it.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're sitting with your coaches, and then he starts talking about the fight. Did you have any suspicions that this might be the case, that you might also be, only the second fighter in history to lose a fight and then be offered a contract?
Oh no, not at all. And my coach kind of I thought they wanted to turn it on to kind of just like hear what Dana had to say about the fight. Like if we said it was an awesome fight, they kind of wanted to hear that. And I kind of didn't even want to watch it, because it was just like, I'm happy for, Kareckaite. She's an amazing fighter. And, just seeing how happy she was after the fight, like, I love that. I love that because her dream is just as important as mine, So, but a part of me, I just didn't want to like watch it after the fight because it was still all fresh to me. So we watched it, and when he announced, that we both got contracts, everybody just jumped up and started screaming, and like I didn't even have words. Oh, I just started crying, But
I mean, it makes perfect sense. But so tell me, obviously, this whole thing's a whirlwind. We're talking about a 10-day span here. You're talking about going from being 142 pounds and trying to lose, 17 of them just like that, to being in the cage, the highs of the fights, the lows after the fights. You get the contract. How long did it take to like really set in that this is the reality, that you've only been a pro for 3 fights, you've turned it around and made the UFC in that amount of time? When does it sit in for you and you realize you've met this goal?
I don't even think it has set in. Yeah, I got home, and it was crazy. I think the first day I got home, we had some UFC fly out to do a little bit of media out here, trying to get from our hometown and stuff. So I hadn't had time to sit down. And then I got sick yesterday. I had fever. My body was just trying to tell me to rest. Today was the first day stuff kind of started to calm down, and it hasn't even hit me yet. Like it's crazy to say, like, I'm on the UFC roster, and it's a huge blessing. It hasn't even really set in yet.
That's awesome to hear. Now you're 5 days removed from that fight at the time of this interview. I can see we got some bruising still going on. How are we feeling physically, top to bottom? Like, are you feeling like, we can get back in there in the near future? Or are we feeling like, there's some stuff that needs healing?
Oh yeah, I think I'm feeling great. I've came out of a few of my 2 of my amateur fights. I had 2 surgeries back to back within under a year. So I'm blessed to just have these few black eyes. Because I came out with broken bones, had surgeries, and some other fights. So I'm gonna get back to training as soon as I can. Like I'm letting my face heal up, and my knuckles were a little swollen, like most people's after a fight. But as soon as I can, get back to training. Because a lot of work has been put in to get up to this point. But the work that needs to be put in now, especially since I'm in the UFC to maintain that position, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And I'm excited to get.
For sure. Now, I'm guessing timeline, we're talking, you're hoping by the end of the year, maybe back in there. You think in January? What's the timeline like for you?
Really depends on what they offer me. I haven't put much thought into it, but like right off the top of my head, I was thinking early next year, January, February, March, any of those.
Awesome. Now, I obviously the fight is the very interesting part of all this, and thank you for taking us through the fight week. But I did want to ask you, I come from a baseball background as well. I played college baseball in addition to doing martial arts and stuff like that. So when they were giving us your backstory of you came from being a college softball player, you were a catcher. What sort of led you to go from sort of a slower team sport, right? Baseball, softball, slower sport to like some of the fastest paced stuff that you could possibly find. What sort of led you down that road as your next level of competition?
Yeah, I know, right? It's a huge. I played softball my whole life, So I went to McNeese for about 2 years to play, and then I ended up coming home, which is about an hour and a half drive. So I moved back home, and my brother was just going to head kicks just because he was doing it at that time, and I remember working in our little backyard in the dirt. We had a punching bag hanging and there was dirt underneath it. And I would throw kicks. And my brother, he's like 3 years older than me. He used to tell me my kicks were terrible and we would work on and I had no technique. And he was like, well, you should come join head kicks. It's really fun. It's good for fitness purposes. And I was working at a little restaurant and I was just snacking on all the food and just, gaining some weight and not working out because I went playing softball to having nothing to do. So I was like, I'm gonna go try at that gym. And then, I just I started training. Eventually I was allowed into the sparring classes because you have to be a certain, rank to get to the sparring classes to make sure it's safe. So I started doing the sparring class and I was like, wow, this is fun. I like to compete. I've always had like slight little anger issues as a kid, like I wanted to punch something, so it really helps you channel all of that. And the ball kept rolling once I got to finally like compete in classes, and then I wanted to compete on a stage and then compete, amateur, pro, and it just started to build. So it was really like a snowball from there. So
that's awesome. And obviously because your brother was sort of the influencer there, what does he think now? He doesn't criticize your kicks anymore? Does he give you a little bit of an easier time?
He doesn't criticize my kicks anymore. He's very supportive. Yeah, he actually does media and stuff like that. So he makes a lot of my my little posts and my little clips that I'll post. So he helps me out as much as he can. And he actually makes a lot of my t-shirt designs, for my local fights. I'll make t-shirts and he'll make my little donut design and all that stuff. So he's awesome. He's so supportive, and I can really thank him for getting me started because I never would have stepped in the gym if it wasn't for him.
Well, we're glad that he did, and we're glad you got started, and we're glad that this is where the story is going. And once again, fans, this has been Carli Judice, who fights or fought on Dana White's Contender Series, and we'll be waiting for that debut. Carli, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you.